Can you believe we're just weeks away from Diddy going on trial? And the stakes are high. Not only has Diddy been in jail since his September arrest, but it's officially confirmed his ex-girlfriend Cassie is expected to take the stand to testify against him. She won't be testifying under the moniker Jane Doe. Instead, she's planning on using her own name. However, federal prosecutors say Diddy's other alleged victims won't be doing the same. I'm Elizabeth Millner with Law&Crime. Our analysts have suspected for a while that Cassie Ventura is indeed victim number one. Now, the allegations laid out in Diddy's federal indictment match almost to a T her federal lawsuit against her ex, which was settled a day after filing. But since then, Diddy has faced 2 more superseding indictments, and now more victims have been added. But federal prosecutors say testifying under their real names would cause them significant embarrassment, anxiety, and social stigma. Cassie's now settled lawsuit arguably opened the floodgates to where we are today, and her suit laid out a roadmap where prosecutors could take the case from there. For weeks, known only then as victim 1, we thought Cassie would be the only victim. Then came victim 2, 3, and 4. It's unclear who they are. Diddy's defense team has long argued some of them are former girlfriends of Diddy's. Because remember, they claim everything was consensual. According to Diddy's indictment, victim 1, 2, and 3 were named under count 1. Count 1 being the racketeering conspiracy. Prosecutors allege as part of the pattern of racketeering activity, the defendant, that being Diddy, sex trafficked all 3 through force, fraud, and coercion. Prosecutors say in their motion, Diddy allegedly coerced all 3 to participate in orchestrated sexual encounters, aka freak-offs, that lasted hours and sometimes days. Now, a lot of stuff has been redacted, but here's what hasn't been bolded in black. When it comes to victim 2, prosecutors say she explained that testifying at trial will already be extremely traumatic, and the trauma would only be magnified if her identity is revealed, and that's why she asked to testify under a pseudonym. Victim 3 explained the same. She wants to protect her privacy and the privacy of her family, prevent harassment, and minimize humiliation. And the same reasoning was echoed for victim 4. The government in their motion wrote, quote, "The practice of allowing alleged victims of sexual abuse to testify under a pseudonym has been widely permitted because requiring alleged victims to publicly provide their names could chill their willingness to testify for fear of having their personal histories publicized and may cause further harassment or embarrassment." They went on to say, quote, "In light of the explicit nature of the conduct that the witnesses will be testifying about, victims have legitimate fears of harassment by the media and loss of employment potentially resulting from trial publicity. Equally, because of the explicit nature of the offense conduct, which may require victims to testify about degrading and humiliating treatment by the defendant, revealing victims' identities could chill willingness of other alleged victims of sex crimes to come forward." I mean, look, it's not a surprise these victims want to testify anonymously, and we've seen it in other high-profile trials, similar-ish to what Diddy's trial could look like, i.e. R. Kelly, who had a lot of victims, but during trial, they were known as victim 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. They only revealed themselves after the trial on the hit docuseries Surviving R. Kelly. But back to Diddy's case. A lot has changed since he was first indicted, like the fact he's facing more charges and has more alleged victims beyond Cassie. His defense, though, is ready for a big fight. They hope the judge won't allow his prior bad acts, meaning the many civil lawsuits he still faces, arguing that evidence is coming too late. The defense wrote in a response, yet now on the eve of trial and after 2 superseding indictments, the government has surfaced a new plan to taint his trial with evidence about purported heinous acts. They are entirely new, untested, uncorroborated, and uninvestigated allegations. All but one of the alleged incidents happened over 20 years ago, with the oldest dating to the 1980s. But prosecutors argue the jury is entitled to hear from additional witnesses when Diddy's defense team argued everything alleged in his indictment is just a part of his private sex life, defined by consent, not coercion. Essentially saying if the defense says it's his private sex life, witnesses should be on the stand to verify that. As far as the victims in the indictment, though, their testimony will prove crucial, especially Cassie's testimony. Again, we're just weeks away from trial now, and openings are slated for early next month. The stakes are high. If Diddy's convicted, he could spend years in prison. I want to thank Upside for sponsoring today's Law&Crime YouTube takeover. Upside is a free app that gets you real cash back on gas, groceries, and you can even use it at restaurants. It's super easy to use. Just claim an offer in the app, pay as usual using your card, and get paid. And it's actual real cash back too. You can use it Upside at places like Shell, Exxon, 7-Eleven, and even Chipotle. So to find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside, or scan the QR code on your screen, use our promo code LCTakeover, and get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. Again, that's promo code LCTakeover for an extra 25 cents back on your first gallon of gas. I'm joined now by attorney, former federal prosecutor, and president and co founder of West Coast Trial Lawyers. That's Mr. Nima Rahmani. Nima, always great to see you, and thank you so much for being here today. We've had a lot of discussions about victim one in the indictment against Diddy. We know that's Cassie, but there's also victims two, three, and four. We don't know who they are, and they won't be testifying using their real names. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, Cassie is obviously the star witness in the case, and she's the one who broke this whole investigation open when she filed her own civil lawsuit in November 2023. She was not only a victim, but she was a witness to a lot of the other victims who participated in the freak offs. She was romantically involved with Diddy for more than a decade. So there's no surprise in the original indictment when she was the only victim who was identified. And obviously, there is corroboration of her account because we've all seen the video of her being beaten at the Intercontinental Hotel in Los Angeles. But the prosecution wants more, and what they've done is they've chosen who they believe are their best victims in terms of testimony. Obviously, they're not going to put 100 victims on the stand, but they do want several that are going to tell the same story of physical and sexual violence and sex trafficking. And I think the prosecution, at least, they believe they have enough to get a conviction here with those victims.
And given that Diddy exuded this power over the industry previously, kind of before this fall from grace in a way, are you surprised at how terrified the victims are to testify against Diddy? Because the prosecution, kind of in their motion to keep their identities pretty much to keep them anonymous, they were just saying that they're terrified of humiliation, embarrassment, of social stigma if their names were to get out there.
I'm not surprised the victims are terrified. Now, of course, we have public trials in this country, and under the Confrontation Clause, Diddy, through his lawyers, he gets to cross examine those victims. But if you believe the allegations in the indictment, and I do, at least one of them was dangled over a balcony. And we know that Diddy has a lot of weapons because they were seized during the raids of his Los Angeles and Miami homes in March of last year. And not to mention a significant entourage and security. So the fact that you have victims who have been victimized. They're victims of sex trafficking, and now they have to be re-victimized again and tell their story in a very public way. The whole world watching, even though it's in federal court, not it's not being live streamed. Everyone's going to be writing about it, so that re-victimizes them again. And I'm sure that they're terrified of doing so against Diddy. Probably the only saving grace is that he's not a free man and he's in custody pending trial.
And that makes a lot of sense as to why, they may feel a lot more comfortable to testify against Diddy, knowing that he is locked up right now. And we'll kind of see how the trial continues to unfold. Well, as we talk about Cassie, it's kind of interesting to kind of see how everything with Cassie kind of played out through the course of everything, even going back to September of 2023. And it seems like at first a lot of people had, in a way, trouble believing her and the claims that she had made against Diddy in her now settled lawsuit against him. But it seems like more people were on her side and more people believed her when that video came out of the 2016 brutal assault that happened at the Intercontinental Hotel in Los Angeles. But why do you think it was that when we talk about Cassie's claims weren't believed in really until that video came out?
Elizabeth, this is very common. I represent a lot of victims. I don't have any of the Diddy cases, but we've sued a lot of people in the entertainment industry. We sued Kanye, Lizzo, Jason Derulo. We just got a big verdict against Soldier Boy. So, I mean, we sued Takeoff for sexual assault before he passed away. So, I understand the psychology of a victim, and oftentimes they don't want to come forward because people will shame them, they'll blame them, they'll call them liars, they'll say this is a money grab, this was all fabricated. Let's not forget, Diddy, through his lawyers, denied everything Cassie Ventura said, even though he settled her case the day after it was filed. Even after his homes were raided, he denied everything. Only when CNN got that video in May of last year did he finally step forward, and he went on social media and he issued this apology. I didn't think it was particularly heartfelt, but it was the only time that Diddy admitted to anything happening. So that just goes to show first how powerful a video is, but also how the public, they tend to believe these celebrities. And whether it's because they're enamored with them or they love their music or some other psychological reason, people tend not to believe victims. And in today's age of social media, as soon as someone files a lawsuit or makes an accusation, the first thing that happens is people come out and in the comments and tweets on, probably the law and crime comments, they say this person's lying. So it is very challenging, whether you're a longtime girlfriend like Cassie Ventura or you're someone who just participated in one freak off against your will, to come forward and make an allegation that will become public.
And I know a lot of people are anxious to see what her testimony could look like. What do you think it will look like? She was with Diddy for years. However, the defense claims, everything in their relationship was consensual. But what do you think, under direct specifically, her testimony could look like?
I think she'll hold up on direct, and it sounds like through her lawyer, she is eager to testify, and I think she'll do well. I think she's out of that abuse cycle, and now she's probably seen strength in numbers where other people come forward. It's also important to note, oftentimes abusers, they don't just abuse one victim. So it's really hard for the first person to come forward. But when that person does, whether it's a man or a woman, oftentimes that motivates others to come as well because they say, well, look, I have a similar story. And I see strength, I see power in this person that's come out to stand up against her abuser. So I think we're going to see a more powerful, a stronger, a more willed Cassie Ventura on that stand, and I think she'll do well. But of course, this case has really nothing to do with the direct examination. It's all going to come down to the cross examination because we know Diddy, through his lawyers, they're going to come after the victims very aggressively. They're going to say that they've all filed civil lawsuits, that someone like Cassie is just a disgruntled ex. This is all fabricated and made up for money, and really, this was all consensual and it was just regret. Not saying I believe it, but that's what the defense is going to be here.
And I imagine they'll be very intense when it comes to that cross examination. But I'm wondering your thoughts on how intense they'll actually be. Because, I know we had discussions a couple weeks back about Cassie. She's now pregnant, but I don't picture them, or hopefully not in a way, them just yelling at a pregnant woman. If I were a juror on the case, I would just kind of be like, what is happening? But how intense do you think this cross-examination will be, given that they've been broken up for years, given that she's married now and she's a mother now to about to be three children? But what do you think it'll look like, and how do you think a juror will kind of interpret an intense cross-examination like we may be anticipating?
Well, this is my prediction, and I think it'll be something similar to another very high-profile case, and that was Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard. I predict we will have a female defense attorney handling the cross-examination, so it's not an overbearing man. That's something that we typically see in these cases, but I do think the cross-examination will be aggressive. It will be rigorous because Diddy's life is on the line. This is not a time to kind of hold back or use kid gloves on the witness. So obviously you don't want to be so overbearing where you turn off the jurors. They're ultimately your audience here. But I expect a very aggressive and vigorous cross-examination by a female defense attorney when it comes to Cassie Ventura.
It'll be interesting to see whether it'll be Alexandra Shapiro or Tinny Garrigo. So I know when she does take the stand, that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And I want to ask you about the indictment, specifically the second superseding indictment. Are you surprised prosecutors filed it just so close to trial? We're seeing more charges now. There's more victims now since the indictment, the first indictment back in September. But why do you think they filed it so late?
We did see some tweaks with the most recent indictment, and you're right. Now, normally you don't see a superseding indictment month. Now, typically judges don't like it, but it's really up to the defense to ask for a continuance because they need more time. The defense in this case is not asking for a continuance, in large part because Diddy's in custody and he wants to push this case forward as quickly as possible. I think what you saw happen, some of it were technical changes. And I actually spoke to your colleague, Jesse Weber, when that indictment came out last week. But one of the changes we see is instead of having one count of sex trafficking and one count of prostitution, Mann Act violations, you see it broken out a little bit. That way, if in the possible but not likely event that the jurors find that victims one, two, and three weren't all sex trafficked, they can maybe, return a guilty verdict on one count with respect to one victim and a not guilty on another. So we do see that separation. It does appear that the time length uh, was lengthened. We're talking about a greater period of time of allegations here, but there may be a gap as well where they don't have victims who were trafficked during that time. So I think they also split up some of the allegations to account for the time as well. But I don't think there's a whole lot of substantive changes to the newest indictment. And the prosecution actually sent a letter to the judge and the defense saying, even though there are additional charges, all this evidence has been produced in discovery already. So there's nothing new here. And therefore, there's no good basis for a continuance if the defense were to ask for one.
Yeah, and that just means that it's just a couple more weeks away. And, if there's no delays, we're going to be heading, or not we, but, Diddy will be heading to trial very, very soon. How tough do you think the jury selection process will be? And if you were a prosecutor on this case, what type of jurors are you going to be particularly looking for?
It's going to be tough because everyone in the entire world knows about this case and probably has seen that video of Cassie being beaten. If you're the prosecution, and as someone who lives and practices in LA and has represented, really sued a lot of celebrities, you want to make sure that there are no fans on that jury. Jurors tend to love celebrities, at least here in my hometown of Los Angeles. And I imagine that it's somewhat similar there in New York, maybe not as much, but it's an issue. And if you have fans on the jury, they have a tough time convicting celebrities. And that's just the reality. And let's not forget, Diddy has been charged once before in New York. Very different case, a gun case, a state case, but he was acquitted in that case. So you got to be very careful during jury selection if you're the prosecution.
And what about the defense? What do you think they'll be looking for?
The defense is going to look for folks who would potentially buy the argument of consensual sex. Because let's not forget, if you're an adult, and there's been no allegations in the criminal case of sex trafficking of minors. So adults can consent to any sex they want, no matter how freaky it is. So I think that's going to be the defense here. Someone that, might be prone or at least willing to sort of, buy that argument. Someone that, and obviously you're not going to ask personal sexual questions of the prospective jurors, but if you can get a sense of, well, you know what, this is a juror that might say, even if it's some sort of group sex activity or orgy or being filmed or whatever the case may be, that juror might believe that this particular witness or victim might have consented to it. That's the exact type of juror you want if you're the defense here.
And those jurors will be lining up. I believe that they're going to be taking pretty much hundreds each day. So again, we'll just have to wait and see how this all continues to play out. Nima Rahmani, always love having you on, always appreciate it and love your insight. Before we sign you off though, looking back to September of 2023 when Cassie first filed her lawsuit to now, we're in April of 2025. Are you surprised that we even got to this point? It still kind of boggles my mind sometimes.
I am surprised, and this is what I believe. I truly believe that had Sean Diddy Combs paid Cassie Ventura what she demanded, and it was reportedly $20 to $30 million, we would not be here today. Let's not forget, Cassie was up against the statute of limitations. New York State had opened it, and I believe that window was closing in November 2023. So they were negotiating behind the scenes. Reportedly, obviously, we don't know if this is accurate or not, Diddy was only willing to pay $10 million, which really amounts to 1% of his $1 billion reported net worth. Had he just paid her what she asked for, we might not even be here today. So the fact that it may have been not only Diddy's violence, but his greed that put him in this position is very telling in my opinion.
Yes, it is. And that fall from grace really just felt like once it started, it just went from there. Nima, again, thank you so much. It'll be very interesting to have you back on, or not interesting, I should say, but it'll be very great to have you back on once that trial starts. And always appreciate your insight. Thank you so much for your time today.
Of course, great talking to you, and I'm sure we're going to talk very, very soon.
Absolutely. Diddy still remains in the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, New York. His next hearing is scheduled for April 25th. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.